My name is Marcus Webb, and for 4 years I have been married to a woman who looked right through me. Not in the way people say when a marriage goes cold. Not distance, not resentment, not the quiet death of two people who stopped trying. My wife looked through me the way you look through glass, aware something is on the other side, but unable to reach it. Or so I was told. Serena and I met at a rooftop party in Austin on a Thursday night in late October. She was wearing a green dress and arguing with someone about property law, and I remember thinking, who argues about property law at a party and somehow makes it the most interesting conversation in the room? We were married 14 months later in a small ceremony in the Texas Hill Country. Her sister Claire stood beside her. I thought Claire hated me. Serena laughed and said Claire hated everyone equally, so I shouldn't take it personally. 3 years into our marriage, on a Tuesday morning in February, a truck ran a red light on Lamar Boulevard and hit the passenger side of our car. I walked away with a broken collarbone and a gash above my eyebrow that needed 11 stitches. Serena did not walk away. She was airlifted to St. David's Medical Center. And when she finally opened her eyes 4 days later in the ICU, she looked at me standing beside her bed and said, very quietly and very clearly, "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are." That sentence rearranged everything. The diagnosis came in stages, the way bad news always does, like doctors are worried you can only absorb so much at a time. Dissociative amnesia with functional neurological overlay. The trauma of the accident, combined with what her neurologist described as a pre-existing vulnerability in how her brain processed severe stress, had essentially locked her out of her own autobiographical memory. She remembered language. She remembered how to walk, how to eat, how to read. She could tell you who the president was and recite the capitals of European countries. But she could not tell you her own last name. She could not tell you she had a husband. She could not tell you she had a sister, a childhood home in San Marcos, a bar exam she had passed on the first try, a habit of folding the corners of book pages even though she knew it was wrong. She was 30 years old and she was a stranger to herself. The first year was the hardest in the way that only the first year of something devastating can be. I visited every day. I brought photographs. I told her stories about us, our first date at that Thai place on South Congress that gave us both food poisoning, the road trip to Big Bend where we got a flat tire at 2 in the morning, and she laughed so hard she cried. She listened politely. She smiled in the way you smile at someone telling you a story that has nothing to do with you. Her sister Claire stepped in fast. I will give her that she was efficient. Within 3 weeks of the accident, Claire had arranged for Serena to be transferred to a private memory care facility in West Austin called Lakeview Restorative Center. Top rated, she said, the best specialists. I agreed because I did not know what else to do, and because grief, in those early months, has a way of making other people's certainty feel like solid ground. Claire also quietly initiated the process of becoming Serena's legal guardian. Temporary, she said, just until Serena could make decisions for herself again. I was her husband, but we had no power of attorney, no medical directive, nothing. We were young. We hadn't thought about any of that. The court agreed with Claire's petition. I signed where my lawyer told me to sign, not understanding then what I was giving away. What I did not know, what I would not understand for another 3 years, was that Serena had recently revised her will. 2 weeks before the accident, she had updated her estate documents to transfer full independent control of her share of the Hartwell family trust to herself, removing Claire as co-trustee. The trust held 11 commercial properties across Central Texas, inherited from their parents. Serena's portion alone was worth somewhere north of $4 million. The revision had not yet been filed with the probate court when the truck hit us. As Serena's legal guardian, Claire quietly ensured it never was. I did not know any of this yet. I just knew that my wife was in a care facility, that she did not know my name, and that every morning I woke up and thought today might be the day something comes back. It was in the 3rd year that I started to notice. Small things at first. The way Serena's eyes would track me when I entered the room, not the vague polite attention she gave the nurses, but something with more intention behind it. Once, I reached across the table to slide her water glass closer and her hand moved barely, maybe an inch in the direction of mine before stopping. She looked down immediately. I told myself it was a reflex. I told myself I was reading into things because I needed to. But then there was the afternoon I mentioned, offhand, the name of our dog. A golden retriever named Biscuit who had died the year before the accident. I said his name in the middle of a sentence about nothing, and Serena's breath caught. Just for a second. Her eyes went still in that specific way eyes go still when something lands, and then her face went carefully neutral again. I went home that night and sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. I want to be clear about something because this matters. I did not suspect Serena of faking. That thought did not cross my mind. What crossed my mind was something more frightening, that she was recovering, or had been recovering, and that something or someone was interrupting that process. That there was a reason she was not getting better. I started paying closer attention to her schedule at Lakeview. Her primary treating psychiatrist was a doctor, Ronald Voss, brought in by Claire about 8 months after the accident. I had met him twice. Soft-spoken, precise, the kind of man who never quite answers your question directly. He ran what he called memory integration sessions with Serena 3 times a week, and he had been the one, consistently, to report minimal progress. I asked to sit in on a session. Dr. Voss said it would be counterproductive given my emotional proximity to the patient. Claire, who was present for that conversation, nodded solemnly. I was her husband, not the professional, and apparently those two things were incompatible. Something in me went quiet and cold. I called a private investigator named Dale Pruitt, a retired Travis County detective who had done some work for a colleague of mine. I told him I needed a full background on Dr. Ronald Voss and asked him to be discreet. While Dale worked, I did my own digging. Dr. Voss's published work was legitimate. His license was current, but his specialty, before pivoting to private practice, had been something called therapeutic dissociation management, a real field with legitimate applications, but also one that, in less ethical hands, could be used to deepen and maintain dissociative states rather than resolve them. I read papers until 1 in the morning and felt sick in a way I could not entirely explain yet. Then I thought about the cameras. Lakeview had a standard visitor policy, all common areas monitored, private rooms not. I had asked once about adding a personal monitoring device in Serena's room, framed it as wanting to check on her remotely. Claire had shut that down immediately. Privacy concern, she said. Serena deserved dignity, she said. I had backed off. This time I didn't ask. I told the day shift nurse I was upgrading the Wi-Fi router in Serena's room and wanted to add a small extender near the window. The nurse didn't care. I mounted a camera the size of a coat button behind a framed photo. I had brought a picture of Serena and me at Big Bend, the one from the road trip. I figured she would have wanted it there, once. I also added an audio recorder beneath the chair cushion by her bed. The kind that activates on sound. Then I waited 3 days. What I heard on the audio first was Dr. Voss. I recognized his voice from our 2 meetings, that careful, metered cadence. He was speaking to Serena, and his tone was nothing like the clinical neutrality I had observed. It was low, intimate, practiced. You're still tired, he said. You're still not ready. When you try to remember, it hurts. You know it hurts. The memories aren't safe yet. Just rest. Just stay here. There was a pause. Then Serena's voice, and I had to play it back 3 times because I had not heard her voice like that in 4 years. Not like that. Not with that texture of someone fully present and fully terrified, said, barely above a breath. How much longer? It was not a question. It was a sentence with all the fight taken out of it. Dr. Voss said, until it's handled. I sat in my truck in the Lakeview parking lot and did not move for 40 minutes. Then I drove to Dale Pruitt's office. Dale had found things. Dr. Ronald Voss had a second professional history that his current license and CV did not reflect. In the early 2000s, under a slightly different professional registration, he had been the subject of a Texas Medical Board complaint involving a patient in a dissociative state who had remained in that state well beyond what her treating team considered medically necessary and whose family had paid Voss's practice a substantial retainer for the duration. The complaint had been settled quietly. The registration had lapsed. He had rebuilt his credentials over a decade and re-entered practice under his full name, Ronald H. Voss, with the gap largely invisible unless you knew to look. And who had referred him to Serena's case? Claire Hartwell. I drove back to my house and stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the photograph on the refrigerator, Serena and me at our wedding. Her head against my shoulder, laughing at something someone had said just outside the frame. I thought about everything she had been carrying for 4 years, awake behind her own eyes, being told she wasn't, being pressed down gently and systematically every time she surfaced. I thought about how scared she must have been. I thought about how many times I had sat across from her and talked and she had listened and could not answer me, and how alone that must have felt. I am not a man who cries easily. I cried that night. The next morning I called my lawyer, a woman named Priya Nair who handled my firm's contracts and who I trusted completely. I laid out everything, the footage, the audio, Dale's findings, the guardianship timeline, the trust documents. I told her I needed to understand what had been done legally and what could be undone. Priya was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, Marcus, if what you're describing is accurate, this is criminal. She meant it. Not as an expression. She meant that what Claire and Dr. Voss had done maintaining a person in a medically induced dissociative state to preserve a legal guardianship and control over an estate was not a civil matter. It was not a family dispute. It was the long, slow, deliberate imprisonment of a human being inside her own mind. Priya filed an emergency motion for an independent neuropsychological evaluation of Serena, supported by our evidence packet, under seal. We requested a temporary restraining order preventing Dr. Voss from any further contact with Serena pending the outcome, and we contacted the Texas Medical Board. We also contacted a neuropsychologist named Dr. Angela Ferris at UT Dell Medical School, one of the leading researchers in functional neurological disorders in the state. Priya had a colleague who knew her. Dr. Ferris reviewed the audio, reviewed Serena's case history, and her response was direct. The therapeutic approach documented in those recordings was not consistent with recovery-oriented treatment. It was consistent with maintenance. The restraining order was granted within 48 hours. When the order was served at Lakeview, I was told Dr. Voss arrived for Serena's scheduled session, was informed he could not enter, and left without a word. I had hired private security to stand outside her door. I did not care what it cost. The independent evaluation took 4 days. Dr. Ferris spent hours with Serena, using approaches that did not involve suggestion, did not involve telling Serena what she was feeling or wasn't feeling, did not involve anyone pressing down. She told me afterward that by the second session, Serena had begun to speak. Not just single words or breath sounds. Full sentences. Careful, exhausted, 4 years worth of held-back sentences. On the 5th day, I was allowed into the room. Serena was sitting in the chair by the window. The Big Ben photograph was still on the shelf. She had her hands folded in her lap and she was looking at them when I walked in, and then she looked up, and her eyes were so familiar it felt like a physical thing, like something shifting back into place in my chest. She said, "You kept coming?" I said, "Every day." She said, "I know. I counted." I sat down across from her, and neither of us said anything for a while. There was too much and we both knew it, and some of it was going to take a very long time, and neither of us was under any illusion about that. But she was there. She was in the room in a way she hadn't been in 4 years. And that was everything. Then she told me what it had been like. She had come back to herself, she said, in fragments, starting about 8 months after the accident. Not all at once. Not in a flood. In pieces, like a signal coming in and out. She would surface and know who she was, know my name, know where she was and why, and then Dr. Voss would arrive for a session and afterward the fog would thicken again. She had understood, eventually, what was happening. She had tried to resist it. She had tried to signal me the hand movement toward mine, the breath when I said Biscuit's name, but she had been afraid that if she was too obvious, something would change. That the sessions would intensify. That she would be moved somewhere harder to reach. She had been managing her own concealment to stay safe, and the loneliness of that was something I could not fully comprehend, and she said she did not expect me to. I asked her why she had never tried harder to reach me, even at risk. And she was quiet for a moment and said, "Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me over Claire." That landed like a stone. She was right that I hadn't seen it. She was right that I had deferred to Claire. To Dr. Voss, to the institutional authority of the whole careful structure built around her. I had been a grieving husband, trying to respect a process I didn't understand, and that grief had made me easy to manage. I said I was sorry. She said she knew. She said she had also had 4 years to decide she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life being sorry about things that were done to her, and that included letting me spend too long being sorry either. That was so completely Serena that I almost laughed. Almost. The court proceedings moved faster than I expected. The evidence was not subtle. Priya presented the audio recordings, Dr. Ferris's evaluation, Dale's findings on Dr. Voss's history, the financial records showing Claire's management of the trust and the estate documents Serena had intended to file before the accident. The judge, a woman who had clearly seen enough in her career to be done with nonsense, reviewed everything with an expression that got quieter and more dangerous as the hearing went on. Claire's attorney argued that his client had acted in good faith based on Dr. Voss's professional recommendations. He said it twice, as though repetition would help. The judge looked at him the way you look at something that has disappointed you, and asked him to move on. Serena's guardianship was terminated. Her estate documents were ruled valid as of their original drafting date. The trust was transferred back to her control. A criminal referral was made to the Travis County District Attorney's Office for both Claire and Dr. Voss on charges including fraudulent exploitation of a disabled person, which in Texas is not a small charge. Claire, to her credit, or maybe just to her nature, did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had always known the math might eventually not work out. She looked at me across the courtroom and said nothing. She looked at Serena and something crossed her face that I still don't have a word for. Not guilt exactly, not regret exactly. Something older and more tangled than either. Serena did not look back at her. Walking out of that courtroom, I thought it was over. I thought the shape of the story was complete, the wrong had been identified. The people responsible were facing consequences, Serena was free. I thought the work ahead was just the long, ordinary, unglamorous work of recovery. Of rebuilding. Of learning to be in a room together without the weight of everything that had accumulated. I was wrong about it being over. 2 nights after the hearing, Serena asked me to sit with her. She had been staying at a hotel near the medical center, close to Dr. Ferris's practice, not ready to come home yet, and I had respected that without question. I brought takeout. We sat on the small balcony and she ate half her food and looked at the parking lot, and then she said, "I need to tell you something about the accident." I waited. She said the accident was not an accident. She said she had known, going into that February morning, that she was about to file the estate documents. She had told Claire 2 days before. Claire had pushed back, they had argued, and Claire had said very evenly. The way Claire said everything, "You don't know what you're doing to this family." Serena had said she did know, and she was doing it anyway. The truck that hit us had run a red light. The driver had a clean record, no alcohol, no drugs, no phone activity. He had told police he didn't see the light. The case had been closed as an accident. Serena had no memory of it, or claimed she didn't, and the investigation had gone nowhere. But Serena, surfacing in fragments over 4 years, had remembered something. She had remembered that the morning of the accident, when she got in the car, her phone had already been moved from where she put it. And the route I was driving, a shortcut she had suggested the night before because there was construction on our usual road, passed through an intersection she did not normally use. She didn't know if she could prove any of it. She said she needed me to know. I called Dale the next morning. It took him 3 weeks. What he found was not a smoking gun. This is real life. And real life is rarely as clean as a courtroom. What he found was that a man named Troy Edmonds, who drove a commercial delivery truck for a company that had since been acquired and dissolved, had received a wire transfer of $11,000 to a personal account 11 days before the accident. Troy Edmonds had died of a drug overdose 14 months later. The wire transfer originated from a shell entity that, after considerable untangling, connected to a property management company that had, at one point, listed Claire Hartwell as a registered agent. Priya took it to the DA alongside the existing charges. I won't tell you the legal process was swift or satisfying in the way those words usually mean. It wasn't. There were motions and continuances, and Claire's attorneys were expensive and creative. But the financial forensics were thorough, and the DA was invested, and eventually the weight of it accumulated past the point where it could be managed. Claire accepted a plea deal the following spring. 22 years. Dr. Voss offered a lesser charge in exchange for testimony, cooperated, and received 12. The civil case regarding the trust was settled with full restitution to Serena, plus damages that I will not specify but that were significant. On the day the plea was entered, Serena and I drove out to Enchanted Rock. She had asked if we could go. It was a Tuesday in April and the park was quiet, mostly empty, just the wind and the pink granite spreading out in every direction and the sky doing what Texas skies do, which is take up more space than you expect. We climbed to the top and sat and didn't talk for a while. Serena said, "I used to be afraid I'd never feel like myself again." I asked her if she still felt that way. She thought about it. She said no. She said she felt like a different version of herself. Like someone who knew things about endurance that she wouldn't have chosen to learn but that were hers now, and she wasn't going to pretend they weren't. She leaned against me and we looked at the hill country spread out below us, and I thought about the rooftop party, and the green dress, and the argument about property law, and the 14 months between meeting her and marrying her, and everything that had come after. All of it, even the 4 years in the middle that I would have given anything to undo. And I thought that I was still, in spite of everything, one of the luckiest people I knew. We moved to a smaller house, closer to the water. Not coastal, this is landlocked Texas, but on a lake, the kind of lake that's actually a reservoir but feels like the real thing on a good morning. Serena went back to work part-time that fall, not as state law, at least not yet, but consulting with an advocacy organization that works on guardianship reform. I think she will eventually go back to full practice. I think she is the kind of person who finishes things. She still folds the corners of book pages. I still give her a hard time about it. She still laughs and does it anyway. There is a version of this story where I tell you that recovering from something like this is straightforward, once the worst part is over, once the right people are in prison and the money is back where it belongs, and the medical records have been corrected and the legal structures have been dismantled. There is a version where I tell you that love is enough, that the foundation we built in 14 months and 3 years of marriage was strong enough that 4 years of absence did not crack it. The truth is more complicated and less dramatic, and I think more worth saying. There are nights. Serena wakes up, and for a moment, she is back in that room and she does not know where she is. There are conversations we have that are harder than anything I anticipated. About trust and about the years we lost and about the things she carried alone for a long time that I could not help with because I did not know. There are things I said in those 4 years, sitting beside her, when I thought she was somewhere else, that she heard clearly and that she has been generous enough to forgive, even when they were not things I am proud of. There are also mornings that are just mornings. Coffee and the sound of the water. Her reading something and laughing quietly to herself. The ordinary texture of a life that almost wasn't. I think about one thing often, something I have not fully made peace with. There were signs before the full picture came clear, before I installed the camera or hired Dale or any of it. There were smaller signs I did not read. The way Claire always directed conversations about Serena's care. The way Dr. Voss deflected every question I asked. The way the institution of it all, the facility, the guardianship, the professional consensus made it feel presumptuous to doubt. I was a young man trying to do right by his wife and not knowing what that looked like, and the people who wanted to take advantage of that situation had planned carefully for exactly that purpose. I tell myself this, I believe it, mostly, but I also think about Serena sitting in that room counting the days I came, and deciding to trust that I would eventually see what was in front of me. She waited 4 years for me to look hard enough. I'm looking now. I don't intend to stop,